we have established the Vice Chancellor's lecture series as an interdisciplinary platform for reflection among leaders from a range of professions, artists, and scholars who are engaged in critical investigations of historical trauma and memory. We hope that the series will create opportunity for dialogue with speakers in the series, including young thinkers with intriguing ideas and insights on issues related to historical trauma and memory. Hence, we have as a respondent today one of the rising scholars, young leaders in the scholarship in this field, Dr. Buhle Zuma. We'll hear more about that later. We have established the lecture series as a kind of a think tank for our project that's funded by the Mellon Foundation, which was launched in this auditorium in February this year. Our hope is that extending the conversations with partners in the project to include a broader scholarly community will lead us to new avenues of inquiry in this broad field of historical trauma and memory research as we consider the various angles from which we can deepen our understanding of and conduct research on trauma and memory studies in the humanities and the arts. So I would like to invite Professor Jonathan Jansen, our Vice Chancellor, to come up on stage, please. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pumla, for this wonderful occasion. I'm quite amazed that so many of you showed up here today in a week when the students are not here. The students are away on a short vacation, and yet, of course, we were able to attract quite a lot of campus citizens, but also friends from off campus. So welcome to all of you, and especially to our guest at Sachs, and to the respondent, Dr. Zuma. I was telling him, I apologize right at the beginning for his surname, and I've never been this close to Zuma before, but you are very welcome, and it's wonderful to also see your eyes in the world of authorship and scholarship from where we sit. Now, Albie, I'm quite sure you get tired sometimes when people go to Google you and give all kinds of information you've heard a million times when they introduce you. So I thought I'd do something a little different. And I'm going to share with the audience 10 things they might not know about you, okay? So hold on to your seat. Some of this is embarrassing. But this is a man, obviously, many of you, I certainly greatly admire. But I thought I just want to introduce him. First of all, did you know his name is not Albie? His full names actually are Albert Louis, the child of Lithuanian immigrants. Albert Louis. So next time, don't take your chances and with Albie. Address the man properly as Albert Louis. Sounds almost regal. Secondly, this is very interesting. He started his activism at the age of 17 by sitting in an area of the General Post Office, as it was called, in an area reserved for what they then called non-whites. At the age of 17, very few young people I know start their activism that early, and no doubt inspired, as many of you know, by his father, Sachs, and his mother, who were activists in their own right. Thirdly, you might not know him because most of us know him as a judge, but he was a lecturer, in fact, at both the University of Southampton in England when he was in exile, and at the University of Eduardo Mondlane in Mozambique. So this is also a professor, and you will see very quickly in his presentation why he is, in fact, both in his style and substance, professorial in so many ways. Number 4. I don't know if Prof. Nicholson, the Dean of Law, is here because I want to check this out with you. This might call for further investigation. But he fell in love with and married one of his clients. I don't know, Louisa Macapella, whether in law this is allowed to, fall in love with and marry one of your clients, but Albie, you owe us an explanation in relation to a wonderful woman called Stephanie Kemp, who herself went through great hardship during the struggle with imprisonment and the like. You might not know this, but he worked very closely with the great Oliver Tambo, and that is, if I ever did a one-on-one interview with Albie, I would love to know more about Oliver Tambo through his own experiences with that great hero of our struggle. Number 6, some of you who've been to the Constitutional Court might know this, but he had a very direct hand in the design of the new Constitutional Court building, which is absolutely spectacular and thought-provoking in so many different ways. Number 7, he is known, in fact, as a Constitutional Court judge who, with his colleagues, were responsible for landmark legislation, 2 of which are very dear to our values as a country. The one is the abolition of capital punishment, and secondly, the overturning of laws that criminalized homosexuality. And I should say this as well, that one of the most important acts of the Constitutional Court, in which Albie played a critical role, was to from time to time take positions as a court that were at odds with the government of the day. And that is so important, not only in respect of the particular judgment, but also in respect of establishing in the mind of the public the independence of our courts. Number 8, you might not know this, but his first book was The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs, which was an account of his imprisonment. So most of us would know the book subsequently, or the book subsequently, is certainly a regular author, but The Jail Diary of Albie Sachs is, to this day for me, a riveting account of what it meant to be inside a South African prison. Number 9, having been a judge on this particular awards panel, you may or may not know, but he won the Ellen Payton Prize, which is a very distinguished prize for nonfiction, Sunday Times Prize, for one of his later books. And number 10, and Albie, here's yet another area in which you owe the public an explanation. He had a child in his 70s. Now, I've just had an uncle in the Eastern Cape who died while having sex in his 70s, and Kaya Dlanga described that as getting laid to rest. But it gives me great pleasure to welcome the great South African Albie Sachs.
Got your attention? My prologue, in fact, starts with 90-day detention. Deep, 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 deep in solitary confinement. And the only activity I'm allowed is to read the only book that's there with me, the Bible. And I come from a very secular background, and I'm reading the Bible with intense interest. And much of it leaves me heartsore. It's so filled, the Old Testament, with smiting enemies and destroying the enemies down to the last dog and chicken, until I come to the Solomon and the Song of Songs and the Psalms, and I feel uplifted, and then more smiting, and then it's the exile and the beautiful prophecies, and I read Isaiah, and I read the words, and the lion will lay down with the lamb, and the swords will be beaten into plowshares. The swords will be beaten into plowshares. And I think that's the theme of this marvelous new intellectual venture that's been entrusted to this university and to Professor Bugler. Not to simply destroy the swords in our life and to simply create new plowshares that can till the soil, but to convert and transform the very plowshares, the very instruments, the very metal in our country, in a sense, almost the very people and thoughts and dreams and fears and terrors, into the plowshares, into hope and positivity. The narrative begins with me now, Albie Sachs, the judge. I'm driving from my apartment in Rosebank to court, and I feel a sense of elation. And I'm wondering, why do I feel so good? And it's partly, obviously, the work that we're going to be doing. But there's something about the place. There's something when I park my car in that underground garage, which wasn't particularly attractive, I feel a lift. And I know we chose the site of the old Fort Prison to build our new constitutional court. It's on a hillside, it's accessible, it's close to public transport, it's rooted in the community. That makes me feel good. I know that building the court there helped to stop urban blight and decay. That makes me feel good. I know that that hill now, Constitution Hill, connects up Hillbrow, populous, densely populated people from all over the continent there, overcrowded, troubled, problematic, vital, energetic, with the beautiful northern suburbs, not a poor person in sight, and round the corner, bureaucratic Braamfontein, the big public buildings. It's a connector of three worlds on our globe kept apart, in South Africa kept apart. It's a connector. That makes me feel good. But I feel there's something more. There's something deeper, almost spiritual, that's giving me a sense of uplift. There's something about the site, about the building, about the architecture, about the management that makes me feel special. Let me refer to some other sites of memory and conscience. The Apartheid Museum. It's almost the complete other of the Constitutional Court. In Johannesburg, established right next to a casino, which is tucked away so that you don't notice it appropriately, as a condition for getting the gambling rights, the investors had to offer to establish an apartheid museum. There's nothing intrinsic to the site. There's no mystique there at all. It's all anti-mystique. And yet it works. It's effective. It narrates the story of the legalized oppression and domination of the past in a very vivid and a very telling way. It's a strong building in modernist style, allowing the exhibits to tell the story more than the overwhelming building itself. It's been well managed, a lot of thoughtfulness has gone into it. It's a kind of architecture absolutely appropriate to its function, and it works. Tourists from all over the world go there. They learn in a relatively short space of time what life was like under apartheid South Africa. And South Africans go there and they get in an encapsulated form a vivid visual and textual narrative of life under apartheid. The next site of memory, Freedom Square. 1955, I was there, the Freedom Charter was adopted. We sat on the ground, there was a makeshift platform. We were surrounded by the police, they came in on the second day, waving their Sten guns. If one person had thrown a stone, there would have been a massacre. We sang, we sang, we sang. A place of intense memory, the document that played a foundational role in the creation of South Africa was adopted there. And now there's a big, vast expanse with monumental buildings at the side, and it's empty. There's no vitality. It's as though somehow these heavy buildings have suppressed that intimate connection with the past. There's a very lovely museum that has wire figures of people who were at the Congress of the People. If you want to see 20-year-old Albie Sachs in wire, go to the museum at Kliptown. It's beautifully done, but it's tucked away. Nobody sees it. There's a cone with an eternal flame and some things written there, like monuments have. It doesn't work. It doesn't function. Is it a problem of management? I don't know. But there was something in the very concept, and the thoughtfulness was appropriately designed to signify that special spot. But the way it was realized had exactly the opposite effect. One needs to think about that. What's happening now is the people in the community are setting up their stalls. They're selling knitted goods and oranges and things imported from China under these big columns, telling you the disjuncture between the building and the community, but inviting some appropriate renovation and rethinking about how it functions. Freedom Park in Pretoria. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, I'm invited to go to Freedom Park. It's up the hill. A memorial to honor John Harris, a member of the Liberal Party, African resistance movement. His comrades are captured. He discovers explosives. He puts them in Park Station in Johannesburg. He phones the police and authorities. Nothing is done. People are blown up. There's death. He's sentenced to death. He's hanged. And I go there. Some members of his family are there. He was the most despised and rejected, abandoned even by many people in the Liberal Party. He went to the gallows. He wasn't even singing a South African freedom song. He was singing We Shall Overcome, a beautiful international song, but in a sense it emphasized how detached he was from the people's movement here, and yet he gave his life for the freedom struggle. It was an intensely emotional occasion for me. A long posthumous honor given to him, his children who'd grown up not even knowing who their father was for a number of years, now being present there, and we're up on these hills. There are 3 hills in Pretoria, and you see the Voortrekker Monument on the one side, and you see the Union buildings on the other side, and here's this Freedom Park. It was spiritual and emotional. Years later, I come back, and there are buildings up on that hill, beautifully constructed buildings, very, very elegant. But somehow they've lost that connection, that historical connection. They've lost the mystique. What does it mean to be now linking up the Voortrekker Monument with the Union buildings, with the New Pretoria? Somehow that's got lost. I'm told there's a very fine museum that's been constructed at the base, but what's missing now is people. You've got a hillside, you've got buildings, You've got a very wonderful wall of remembrance of people who died going back to the 17th century, the first people killed when colonialism came. People died in different wars and battles. A big dispute over the names of South African troops who died in fighting against Umkhonto we Sizwe and against the freedom struggle. Some kind of South African compromise found to get their names there as well. It's beautiful. And yet no one knows about it. Problems of management, problems of thoughtfulness. Somehow something must be done to restore that mystical almost connection between the ancient hillsides of Africa, the Union buildings and the Voortrekker monument, to recapture the spirituality and not allow the buildings to dominate. But a very special place, its time will certainly come. Lily's Leaf Farm, Rivonia, where Mandela was captured. Modestly restored, excellent, restrained architecture, strong little exhibits that just remind you of the past. It's not triumphalist, it's not heroic, it doesn't have a big statue of the people there with arms outstretched saying, we are the winners. It's just the opposite, and it's so evocative because it's restrained, because it allows the buildings and the memories and the spirit, almost the ghosts, to speak. I heard from somebody in the ANC attending a meeting there, and he said, you know, meetings have become very boring these days. I go there and I feel exalted. I feel in touch with, our culture doesn't speak with our ancestors, but in touch with the previous generations. I feel in touch with that. And it's an excellent example of a successful architecture, good management. A site itself, intrinsic to the site, is the fact that this is where it all happened. Very modestly represented. I moved down now to Cape Town, sites of memory there, Robben Island. There was a great push by a number of entrepreneurs. Robben Island, fantastic. We can make it into a kind of theme park. We can have a casino there. We will have visitors from all over the world. Fantastic. And to the great credit of the South African authorities, the former prisoners, the government, no. The strength of Robben Island comes from its isolation. Its quietness speaks. You travel by boat to get there as the prisoners travel by boat, not in shackles, not going up and down, not wondering what's going to happen to you. But there's something special when you remove from the mainland, you're traveling out to see the place. And it's very simple. And of course, the high point for everybody is to see the cell where Mandela was locked up. And I had the privilege of being taken there by Eddie Daniels, who'd spent 12 years on the Robben Island, who'd been in the same trial as Stephanie Kemp. I married her long after she'd ceased to be my client. Sadly, we, as I said in the film Made of My Life, we could withstand everything, the tortures, the exile, everything, except living together. And we separated, but we're still very good friends. And Eddie Daniels takes me to the spot and he recites the poem Invictus. It was very, very kind of moving. And then he tells us, when we were in trouble, who did we go to? We went to Madiba. When Madiba was in trouble, who did he go to? He went to Walter Sisulu. Now imagine how emotional it was for me. I'd been locked up in the mainland. This is the scene, the area, the place where our leaders and heroes had been locked up. But hearing a story like that, and hearing it from somebody who'd been there, and that was an enormous connector. There's a whole generation of visitors to Robben Island now who've been accompanied by former prisoners. It's almost unique in the world. Unique in the world, where the former prisoners are describing things. And as turned out, the more quiet the prisoners were, ex-prisoners were, the more gentle and soft their memories, the more powerful the impact. Instead of being angry and denouncing and saying, how could you, that leaves no space for the participants' own emotions to come out. They would just tell these little stories of what life was like. There have been huge problems of management, as is well known. I'm told there's a good CEO today in Robben Island. I only hope its full potential is reached. People shouldn't have to battle to get there because the ships are not running properly, not properly looked after. Things like that all have to be attended to. But it's a very remarkable place. It's part of our history. The island is the island, the prison is the prison. The memories are very intense and powerful. You just go there, and provided that this form of explanation, the links with the ex-prisoners or their successors can be achieved, this will be something extremely important for South Africa and for the world. District 6 Museum. Little place. I love it. I can't even quite explain why. It's got none of the artifice of a great museum. It's got little chunks from District 6, the street signs, the names. It was done by the people who'd been removed from District 6. It has that feel, it has that quality, it has that touch about it. And I sent people there. We learned something from the success of the District 6 Museum. Its intimacy, its warmth, its gentle but very, very compelling voice. The last place I'll mention as a site of memory like this, Red Location in Port Elizabeth. I wonder how many of you even heard of Red Location? Anybody in this room? Just 2 or 3 people. It's in one of the old townships. A dramatic and bold idea to have the museum in the township, not telling the people, we will bus you in. It's not outreach, it's inreach. It's placing the museum right in the heart of where the community lives. And the architect, Jono Eru, won the competition partly because he made extensive use of corrugated iron, this material that had sheltered the most humble amongst us, now elevating that material into a dignified material to house the memories of the past, and striking buildings, and it's a powerful place. And now they've added on a place for an art gallery, for performing arts, and you feel something special. You feel the uplift when you go there, except now you can't get in. The community have barricaded it. They say you promised us houses, and instead you're giving us performing art centers and a museum. There are problems of management in relation to the museum itself. How do you keep a museum living and active? There are problems of managing the tourism, but in particular there have been problems of establishing an appropriate relationship with the community. Joe Slover used to say, I'm not going to tell you I told you so. That was his way of telling you so, that I told you so. And I don't like saying if only they'd listened to me. But it wasn't just to me. I was on a review committee some years back, and I said the people were promised houses. They haven't got their houses. They're going to feel alienated and robbed. You can't have a development of art and arts in opposition to, in disregard for the material needs that you promised you will settle for the people. Potentially it's going to be a great place. Potentially I think it's an innovator because of the location. But they haven't found the answer to that yet. You'll see a very varied story. And it's not the mystique of the place, the memory of the place, that has to be decisive. There's no memory in the Apartheid Museum. The memory is all recreated. There's nothing about that spot. And yet, with fine architecture and a lot of conceptual thoughtfulness in terms of representation and bringing in excellent body of historians, they produced a very well-functioning, very successful, and I might say well-promoted and well-marketed site of conscience and memory in a spot that has no conscience and no memory. Lilies Leaf, Apartheid Museum, both have an intimacy not apartheid, Lily's Leaf and the District 6 Museum have an intimacy, a connection with the people who were directly involved that somehow speaks and is very telling. Robben Island, the site itself with the prison, the boat ride out there, the knowledge that Mandela was locked up, 20 years on the island and many more years, so many others locked up there. It's powerful and telling. Freedom Park needs rectification. Excellent architecture, but somehow the mystique has been lost. It needs to be recaptured. And what's most missing are the people. People should be streaming in there on weekends. They should be picnicking there. It's too solemn. It's not people friendly. How can you have a place, Freedom Park, that with the names of all the people, mostly humble people who suffered, mostly the people who were the servants and the cooks and the gardeners, and if servants and cooks and gardeners today are not made to be felt welcome there, there's something missing. But its day will come. I return to why did I feel so elated when I went to work at the Constitutional Court? What was that source of inner uplift? It had a lot to do with the nature of the site. Here we have a Constitutional Court in the very site of the Old Fort Prison. We say with a very dubious pride, we South Africans have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. No one else can make that claim. And that's where we put our Constitutional Court. The swords into plowshares theme is now beginning to evolve. That's part of it. And I'd like to just interrupt, a little interruption now, a little interlude. I get a phone call, I'm sitting in that building. Hello, Albie Sachs. It's Pik Botha here. I believe you've made a translation into English of the poem Dis Al. I need it in a big hurry. It was actually at a time when I was totally immersed in writing the Fourie case, the same-sex marriage case. It required all my attention, but this was such an odd, crazy request from Pik Botha. I said, okay, and I put aside Fourie for a couple of hours. And the background to my translating Dis Al is my first visit to Bloemfontein after 24 years of exile, 1990. And there's some time before our meeting, and some urge says to me, go to Die Vroue Monument. I don't know why. I had an hour or two, and I went there. And I was deeply moved to see the stories, the statues, the laments, the songs, the grief, the elegies for the women who died in concentration camps, to see the little relics of the people, the commandos who were imprisoned in Ceylon and the Bahamas and Bermuda, I think, St. Helena, and they send their little things that they made afterwards are collected. It was so like us, our people in Robben Island, making a saxophone out of seaweed, our people carving little things. It was so like us. It was another form of human inhumanity to human beings in another period, yet it moved me deeply. And I then go afterwards to the Voortrekker Monument. It has no impact on me at all. It didn't have that sense of humanity. It's a big, monolithic structure and building to power. Not to suffering, not to humanity, but to power. And I'm turned off, and I say we mustn't have monuments like that. That's not the way we represent the pain of our people. But on the way out, I see the poem Dis Al, a drawing of a commando who's come back, and there's a bird circling overhead, and there's a tree, and he's looking down, they're just ruins. That was his farm, that was his home, there's nothing. dis die blond, dis die blauw. It's very short, and I'm very moved, because we had people coming back. Nat Masemola, my friend on the Constitutional Committee of the ANC, came back to Pretoria. His house was gone. There was nothing there. Nothing, not even a stone, just all. And I'm feeling somehow these emotions of suffering and pain, they go from generation to generation. Sometimes the people, the descendants of those who suffered, in turn become the ones who are meting out suffering to others. But we have to bear that in mind when we are thinking of the story of our nation. And so I translated it, and somehow the story got around. And I remember even for him, I changed just the blonde, just the blue in my original. I said, it's the white, it's the blue. And I said, no, it's the blanched, it's the blue. It keeps the bleu bleu. A special edition for Big Boot, and I sent it off. So now I'm in the Constitutional Court, and I have this feeling of uplift. And it's partly knowing that we are right next door to the old number 4 prison. Yvonne Shaka Shaka sang songs about number 4. When my wife, Vanessa September, took our then little baby from Rosebank to the court, she wanted to catch one of the taxis. I'd had to drive in to get there in time. And I don't know, I think the signal is, I think this is the signal. And the taxi stops, and she says, can you take me to Constitutional Court? What? Can you take me to number 4? Yes, get in. Notorious as that site of pain in Johannesburg. Now right next to number 4, this beautiful Constitutional Court. And reusing some of the bricks from the awaiting trial block are in the court chamber. And it's turning negativity into positivity. You don't suppress it. You don't say, forget about it. You don't say, let's move on. You acknowledge the pain of the past. You live with it, but you're not trapped in it. Because when you go to the court, you know why you need a court, why you need fundamental rights. But you also, when you go to the prison, you know story doesn't stop there. We South Africans are capable of transcending, getting beyond, and using that terrible negative energy, converting it into positivity. And I felt, yes, maybe that's part of my sense of elation, but there was still something more. And I'll end with this. The something more was a feeling that I have, slightly sad feeling. We've made huge progress in South Africa. We beat up on ourselves a lot, and it's actually quite amazing what we've accomplished. Terrible problems, and many problems we're making for ourselves, we can't blame on the past. We've got to take responsibility and account for the mistakes that we're making, and sometimes it's more than mistakes. The misconduct, all of that has to be taken account of. But the achievements are tremendous in so many different areas. But one thing I still feel so strongly, spatially, South Africa is still divided. We still have like group areas. You see it in the architecture, the building, the psychology, the culture, the tree planting, the gardens. I don't know, little symbols you're not even aware of. And people who before were excluded are now moving into the white areas, but you still think of it as white areas that are being opened up. Into the Model C schools, it's still the white schools. We're making enormous progress. My little kid Oliver is now in Camps Bay. It's great. It's transforming. It's great. But you still feel our country is divided in that sense. And it's sad for me to feel I'm a white person in a white area, white person in a black area. But when I went to the Constitutional Court, for the first time in South Africa, I felt I was just Albie going to work. That space there, we've created not only a new institution, but we've created a new community. A community that looks like the country, demographically, all the cultures, the languages, the tea time. It thrilled me to hear the different languages being spoken by my colleagues, quite spontaneously, naturally. We have that little space in South Africa, maybe an emblem, a signifier, a model of what can be achieved far more profoundly. And what's important for me is it was that combination of the site, so intense, the architecture, so brilliant and thoughtful and responsive to the past, but with a modern outlook. The management, the organization, you don't have to have the private sector involved to have good management. And combine all of these things, plus the ongoing real activity there. It's not a museum. It's a place that functions. It's got an engine, an intellectual engine to maintain respect for the Bill of Rights, in particular for the Constitution. So I just end with this. It was a wonderful feeling for me, Albie, to feel that I am a liberated person in a liberated part of South Africa, that we, through intelligence, through thought, through sensibility, had created for ourselves. I wish Pumla enormous success with this challenging and exciting and entrancing project. And I wish you all well. Thank you.
Dr. Mushle will have a 10-minute response to this.
Good afternoon. I kind of feel that I've been set up. And I blame Prof. Pumla for this. So one of the things that was said, which captivated me right from the moment, is that there's this disjuncture between the architecture, these sites of memory, and the human. That what is missing here is the active part of the human, the active participation of the human. Now, this immediately captures my attention because this is a question which I've begun to think about quite a lot, and that is a question, what does it mean to be human? And therefore, the figure of the human, for me, in everything that Judge Sachs has said, is one of the key things, and it's about how do we create a new genre of the human. And so immediately the question becomes, why do we need a new genre of the human? And that's when we start with trauma. And here the question of trauma, or the issue of trauma, immediately comes up, because one way in which we can see or think about trauma, not so much, or well, not only as an effect of violence, but also as a technology. I think trauma as a technology of nihilism, that technology which attempts to empty out meaning out of people's lives, that kind of thing which, once it settles into people's lives, attempts to do precisely this death of the human, to make life meaningless. So we can think of trauma then as a kind of device that attempts to, that works at both at an ontological and epistemological erasure of memory, not only of memory, but also of the human, as I'm suggesting. So then we are confronted then with this question of trauma and the question of the human on the one hand. And what I think Judge Albie Sachs is pointing to us is then the importance of these sites of memory, which I also think of as also as sites of narration, or sites through which we attempt to tell a particular story. All right. So then these sites become important precisely because we are in this post-apartheid moment, and part of what we are grappling with is, how do we tell a new story? How do you tell a new story of the human? And how do we create a new genre, a new mode of being human through these sites that he's mentioned, Rivonia, Constitutional Court, Freedom Park, and so on and so forth? How can these sites become living memory, as it were, so that we do not fall into the trap of historical amnesia, as it were? And so for me, what is also important in this is not only that these sites are created, but what we also hear is the importance of how these sites need to be sites that are, as Fanon would say, actional, sites that are alive, sites that are, in a sense, have the human participation in them. So I think that's one of the questions that we need to think about in this, because these sites are also sites of commemoration. But when the human is missing, and I think then we've missed that important. We've, in a sense, missed the mark. So then for me, the question becomes, in our attempt to reconstruct and tell a new story, how do we also come up with sites where we are able to keep them alive? Not sites that are, in a sense, overpowering, or it empties out, in a sense, that very meaning which we're trying to create. That I think is a question we will not, certainly I cannot answer right now, but I think it is for us to think about. So with that, then, for me, this question of coming up and creating sites becomes a question of the imagination. Why the imagination? I think that the imagination becomes important in the sense that I often think of the image of the Rainbow Nation as having served us well for a time, but I think at some level it doesn't serve us. And so we need to imagine something else. So I distinguish between the image and imagination. The problem with the image of the Rainbow Nation is that it presupposes that we've done the work of imagination. So what it does then is, in a sense, it lacks that kind of contextualization of, or if you like, those conditions of possibility that would create a Rainbow Nation. The image is given to us already created, and what I think part of what is the challenge for us is to create the Rainbow Nation. And so when we think about these sites of memory, these sites of consciousness about, and that's the work that we need to do. How do we imagine these sites? And how do we imagine the human involvement and how the human lives with and grapples with these tensions between the past, the present, and the future? So this work of the imagination for me becomes important because it's also precisely through this work of how do we imagine a different genre of the human, how do we imagine different modes of being human, that it becomes important. And right at that point, then for me again, it's about ethics. And ethics with me links intimately with the arts. In other words, how can the arts as a creative response to these histories of trauma and devastation help us reimagine the human in a different way? How can the arts help us rethink a new way of being in the world? How can the arts help us remember so that we don't forget, but also help us not to get caught up in our remembrance, in a sense. So we use remembrance precisely as a tool to move us forward, in a sense. Because I think it's very easy to get caught up in the trauma and the remembrance, because that in some way also provides a kind of sort of identity anchor. You create a part of a particular identity from these histories of devastation. So how do we keep that part alive? At the same time, how do we imagine a different future for the human? So I think then the arts become important, and this is what partly as well excites me about this project we're involved in here with Professor Koboto Madizela, is that it involves the arts. And here I immediately think as well, the arts also including architectural design, as Judge Albie Sachs has mentioned repeatedly the importance of this. So then that the arts become for us the theater of the imagination, if you like. The theater of the imagination through which we tell our parables of being in the world, new ways of being in the world, which is what I think we need. So that the background of all of this, I'm not sure how I'm doing for time. I can go on and on, so I must stop. Okay. 4 minutes? Okay, I'll take, apparently I have a bit more time. Okay. Just give me an indication, please, because otherwise I'm going to forget. All right. So then for me, again, the importance of the art, as I was saying, is that it gives us an avenue to be creative, because I think what is often, sometimes the danger we have is that we deconstruct, but what we forget to construct or to reconstruct. And I think the arts give us pretty much that avenue where we deconstruct our history, we remember the problematic parts of our history. And as a Mandela Road scholar, I'm often reminded of this tension of holding up it's a big problem, particularly what's going on at UCT now. I find myself challenged in many ways, pulled on both ends. And so I think that's one of the things that makes South Africa, in a sense, unique, is that we have to live with this tension between Rhodes and Nelson Mandela. How do you begin to make sense of this? And so people have been asking me a lot, so what's going on at the University of Cape Town, how do you make sense of this? And I say, I'm still making sense of it. So it's an ongoing process. But I think that is both the challenge to us as a nation, but it's also a gift, because I think what it allows us, what it allows us to do is to not stagnate into a zone of comfortability. We're always working and grappling with tensions all the time. And for me, again, the arts give us that gift of grappling creatively, constructively, ethically, imaginatively with these tensions of being human in South Africa. Okay, I think I want to stop there, actually, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I wasn't remiss when I didn't introduce myself. Beginning, wanted Dr. Bushle Zuma to get on with it. My name is Kopano Ratele. I work at the Medical Research Council and the University of South Africa. And I work with violence a lot. And I'm part of Professor Koboto Matekizela's project. A few years ago, we invited Judge Sachs at the Institute for Social and Health Sciences. And I can never have enough of his storytelling, his powerful, incredible storytelling. And you want him to go on and talking, but also bringing his artistic side, as you well had, and his work as a judge at the Constitutional Court. So thank you, Judge Sachs, for that. A while back, I attended an exhibition at Iziko in Cape Town. There was a young rap artist, hip-hop artist there, who was part of the speakers. And after he had spoken, I thought, our country's in danger. Our country is in a terrible, you know when they say the future is safe? At that moment, I thought it wasn't safe. Now today I had Dr. Zuma, and as Professor Koboto Matekizela said, his work, if you've been reading it and hearing him, is one where you say, actually, the future is in safe hands. So thank you. Thank you. We have about 35 to 40 minutes of interaction with Judge Sachs and Dr. Zuma. So I will take the first round and about a set of questions. And if you will, I'm sure you'd want to make comments, but if you would keep it short, I'd be mighty happy. So we'll start with Professor Jansen. I recognize you there, sir. I can't see the side. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll stop right there, and then I'll take another one. Professor Jansen.
Can you pass me my paper?
I wonder, Judge Sachs, if I could just ask you whether you could take off on where Dr. Zuma left off, and that is whether you'd be willing to transpose some of your reflections onto the Rhodes debate as a memorial, instance of memorializing memory at, in this case, at UCT.
Thank you. Thierry Lusche from DIRAP. I have a question for both the speakers, and it actually links up to what Professor Jansen just said, because as universities are repositories of knowledge, of memory, as much as they are the places of disseminating and creating knowledge, and they're also sites of commemoration, of course. Rhodes statue, the debate being open now at UCT, to what extent one wants to commemorate this imperialist and racist colonizer, at the center court of the institution. And even here, we have that. We have a racist founder of the apartheid party in the center court in front of the main building on a 4-meter pedestal. So my question is, you've been talking about the new ways of commemorating and new sites of memory. What about the old ones? What are we going to do with them? Can we put them in a corner so that those who have nostalgia can go and look at them, and those who want to see the faces of their former oppressors can see them and learn about them? Or are we just supposed to do what they did in Eastern Europe and pull down the Stalins? What are we going to do about them? How are we going to deal with that?
Just in the middle, just next. Could you introduce yourself as well?
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Prudence Matlaba, and I'm a second-year LLB student. I wanted to know from Judge Sachs that, because when I went through your history, I think you were turning 6 years, and then your dad sent you a letter wishing you a happy birthday, and he was like, I hope you grow to being a soldier. So I want to know if that played a fundamental influence towards you becoming a judge, and how that made you influence the whole country in a way through the arts, through stuff like that. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get that one. Just hold it a second. I didn't hear the question well. You just tell me, summarize it.
You want to repeat the question? Just
No.
didn't hear you.
No, you just summarize for me. All right, you can't. Can you summarize for me?
I think she was referring to a letter that was written to you, I think, by your dad, and he's asking about how that may have influenced your formation.
Whether?
I think she's referring.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sana Mukone. I'm an alumnus of this university. I'm also an alumnus of the University of Oxford through the Rhodes Scholarship. So I'm the beneficiary of my benefactor, Cecil John Rhodes, class of 2011. I'm not sure if mine is a question or a comment, so I ask you just to, to listen in. I think to your sort of the ambivalence that you're experiencing at Rhodes House in Oxford, at Oxford University, in Milner Hall, the dining hall, is a portrait of Cecil John Rhodes as a young man, and to the left as you enter, and to the right is the portrait of Nelson Mandela as a young man. And quotes, the most famous quotes that they're known for making. And so Cecil John Rhodes has his quote as a young man with his beliefs, and Mandela has another. So Mandela says, in order to something like this, I'm just paraphrasing here. He says, in order to make peace or to hope for a better future, you need to shake hands with your enemies, love your enemies, bring them closer, study them, know them, and all that. But for me, with regards to what's happening at UCT, I'm not confused at all, because one of the characteristics, or the characteristics upon which Rhodes scholars and perhaps even Mandela Rhodes scholars are chosen, is one thing: character. So I think that's the juxtaposition between Cecil Rhodes's leadership and the leadership of Mandela. We say, when we look at the leadership and the legacy of Cecil John Rhodes, we look at how a leader ought not to be. I thank him for the Rhodes Scholarship. I benefited. My life has changed greatly as a result, and it has never been the same. Doors are open that I can't even imagine. But also, because I'm not trying to curry favor with him. I must disagree with his legacy and what has happened as a result. He passed away in 1902, but the vestiges of what he held are still continuing. And Mandela, beautiful life. I read his book, Long Walk to Freedom, in 2004. I was in grade 10. I read The Long Walk to Freedom during the June holidays. And whilst I was in Oxford, I read up on Cecil John Rhodes' legacy in a book by Philip Ziegler, which has the title Cecil John Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholarships and the Rhodes Trust. But for me, I think it's a question of leadership. Dr. Martin Luther King said this: intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. So we cannot let students anywhere, in any university, especially at universities, go through the ranks. I expect them to pass, but we're not building their character. So yeah, thank you, that's what I have to say.
Yes. To both speakers, my name is Nongula Kokoboto. I'm an accountant, a guest of my cousin here. I really just feel that we've come to a certain place in South Africa in terms of our history. Maybe the passing of Mandela has brought us there. And my fear is, how are we going to respond to this place? Maybe children, younger people can express it as we see at UCT and Rhodes. You see a lot of anger. I mean, we've seen the anger from the black community, but you see a lot of anger from the white community, also sparks of racism and all of those things. I was talking to two colleagues of mine who are senior partners at one of the big four firms who are leaving or left, and they were saying to me, I couldn't do it anymore because I was expected to defend. It's like something is happening. Maybe you can just share, how should we respond to this moment we've come to?
Thank you very much for the questions and comments. We'll start with Judge Sachs on Rhodes statue and the whole site's memory, and then letter to the department judge and then leadership and how to respond to the further.
There have been a flurry of emails between me and Ferial Hafaji of the City Press, and the last one I received was they're going to publish my comments on the Rhodes statue on Sunday, and I'm zipping up now. I want to keep you all in suspense. But indirectly, some of the themes, one point that's made there, and I think it's worth repeating, you go to university for education, and education includes knowledge, skills, the accumulated wisdom of humanity. But the biggest exemplar is the university itself. How does it deal with its problems? How does it solve its problems? And this is what UCT is now battling with. My own view is that Max Price has been quite extraordinary because you've got these fierce debates and people are getting very angry on all sides and they're digging in their heels. And it's not his job just to be Mr. Neutral, ringmaster, nice, now it's your turn, now it's your turn. He's got to give leadership as well in the midst of all that. But what he said is we must have dialogue, we must have debate, we must listen to all voices. Then the active students say, but how long does the dialogue go on? Forever and ever and ever, and now you're referring it to the alumni, and they're the old guard, and they'll dominate, so now a decision's been taken, and I don't deal with this in my article, we're going to move the statue. In a funny way, that decision allows debate on the statue to continue without that imperious necessity to take some kind of an action. There's an acknowledgement that Cecil John Rhodes, in a sense the benefactor who made the university possible, whose star Lieutenant Jamison has the big Jammy Hall named after him, and he didn't even succeed. The Jamison raid failed. He wasn't even a successful imperialist. Okay, that's not now an issue. Some of the emotion can come down. But still, what to do with the statue? What do you do with it? Do you melt it down? Well, you'll see what my comments, proposals are on Sunday. But the education the students are getting is fantastic because they are trying to see what does it mean to be a human in South Africa today? How do we deal with the past? And people get very emotional about symbols. They fight over flags. They fight over anthems in ways that they won't fight over a house or money or love or anything material or physical because it represents so much to them. And now this is what they're learning to negotiate. And the word that comes to mind sometimes with UCT is torpor, T-O-R-P-O-R, in the sense of we're okay, we've always been progressive, we had this, that, and the other person who studied there, and maybe now that's been shaken up. And that the very turbulence and the need to confront hard, difficult issues, which is what universities should be doing, it's right on their doorstep. And it seems to me being managed with a fair degree of skill, but it's always dangerous to say that because who knows what might happen tomorrow, even this afternoon, or might even be happening while I'm talking. But that's part of the education you get at university. How do you solve problems? And if you have problems with the university itself, how does the university solve it, and how do you react to that? And the one thing I hope never comes to South Africa is this theme of pass one, pass all. We suffered in the past, we're historical victims of Bantu education and its sequels and so on, and now we've just got to be all passed and given our diplomas. I think back so much to Oliver Tambo, OR. It wasn't being Mr. Nice Guy. It worries me. Nelson Mandela is being presented now, sanitized into Mr. Nice Guy, comes out of jail, no bitterness in his heart, meets de Klerk, the pragmatist, they sit down around a table and they do a deal and South Africa's okay. Isn't he extraordinary? I'm going to turn around the question put to me. Mandela brought us this far. We brought Mandela, he didn't bring us. We, the people of South Africa, brought him. And he found a beautiful way to articulate our strongest hopes and dreams, and with style, and with a graciousness and an appeal to everybody. And his equal who deserves to be known and extolled as an equal, was Oliver Tambo, with whom I worked so hard. If they did a paternity test to find out who's the father of our Constitution, it would be Oliver Tambo. It's his DNA. His DNA, his vision is right there, deep in the Constitution. The answer to group rights and special protections for whites, and how can you deal with the oppressor, and we were going to have 3 presidents and own affairs and all the rest. And he said, no, a Bill of Rights for everybody. And I felt so strongly with OR working with him that his basic spirit was the whites in South Africa are too inward, too selfish, too trapped in their history to ever imagine the country belonging to everybody. We Africans who've suffered so much for being who we are, we will prove that it is possible for us all to live together as equals. And this wasn't a sign of weakness in being Mr. Nice Guy. This was a sign of pride, an enormous strength that he had, that we African people will have the generosity, the vision, the respect for international values to create a country, and we will prove that it is possible for black and white to live together as equals. It's a source of strength, not a weakness, and not just of being charming and nice. The charm and being nice was part and parcel of it. It flowed from it, but it came from that deep, 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 deep conviction. And to me, that's important in how to deal with offensive things in the past, from the past, things that wound us then and that jar. And you do it with a sense of, in dealing with these issues, as was mentioned, how can we deal with them in a way that is constructive, that gets us out of that trap of bitterness and resentment and retaliation, and it's either you in charge or we in charge, that transcends and creates that South Africa, that country, that world, that university, that internal personal space where I can feel free and liberated, and I can challenge and dare and be excited, I can take chances, all of those things that we want, human beings, that's part of being human in the new South Africa. The letter I got from my dad, age 6, he called me Albert, dear Albert. This is during World War II. May you grow up to be a soldier in the fight for liberation. Now that's pretty heavy for a 6-year-old. When my son Oliver turned 6, I didn't send him a card like that. But what was important, in a sense, was that theme of liberation being number one, emancipation being number one. But I couldn't bear my parents assuming automatically I'd follow in their footsteps. And it was only when I was at university in my second year that I met a young crowd, my age, my peers, who had those beliefs, and then I was ready. And a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting on a bench marked non-whites only. By the way, 17, the magistrate looked at the charge sheet and said, "Oh, I see we have a juvenile here." And he sent me home to my mother. Rhodes scholarships. Yes. It's not 50-50. Rhodes, the visionary, who had a few faults. Mandela, the freedom fighter who was gracious and forgiving. That's awful. Rhodes was... Imagine now, you're coming to South Africa and the crooks and the swindlers of the whole world are coming here to get hold of the gold mines and the diamond mines. And who rises to the top? Cecil John Rhodes, this Oxford-educated gent, defeated the most ruthless adventurers from all over the world. You've got to be ruthless to do that. He, in his own way, was a visionary. He got things done. He had character in that sense of a boldness and a strength. But he used machine guns to terrify the people of Pondoland to get the final annexation against the Matabele people. That wasn't argument, that wasn't persuasion. And yet he got all this land and he left it to posterity. Now we posterity, we have a right to claim, not simply to trample on his grave and to spit him out. That's, in a sense, that's... You don't knock out your adversaries in history. You respond to them. You transcend what they were doing. Not by equalizing yourself with them, saying it's 50-50, or not by demoting them and obliterating them. Locating them in their moment in history, understanding the nature of imperialism then, and managing all the contradictions that emerge. If I were a Rhodes Scholar, I'd be proud to say I am a Rhodes Scholar, because you are reinvesting the notion of Rhodes Scholarship with yourself. It's a new humanity, is seizing on it. He owes it to you, he owes it to everybody who gets it, and it's to the credit of the people awarding the scholarships that they are looking for people with spirit and character, and it's not white men only with maybe an anti-Semitic theme thrown in. It's now the nation being represented in the Rhodes Scholarships. We shouldn't be maybe too obsessed with the name. He's lost his country. He had 2 countries named after him, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia. He's lost that. So he's got a Rhodes Memorial. He's got Rhodes University. I won't go anywhere near that issue. Let them worry about that. And he's got a statue. And to know what I say about the statue, let that wait until Sunday. To the present moment of white-black relations. Yes. I think the one thing you get when you've been around for a hell of a long time, which is a nice way of saying you're old, is you can look back on lots of periods in your life. And we got the long-term view, the vision. Otherwise, we'd never have survived. It was like 30 years of exile. And our movement was crushed, and we were scattered, and Robben Island, and people were being tortured to death. It was kind of awful. And we saw other movements split. The Chileans were fighting with each other, the Brazilians were fighting with each other, the Burmese were fighting with each other. Somehow we kept a sense of basic unity. We hung in there. We had the long vision. And I lived through Mozambique. It was fantastic going to Mozambique after independence. In the years, you want to hear another story of mine, I'll tell you another story while I'm about it. I'm in exile in London. The ANC is meeting. We're in a drafty, cold little hall somewhere that we can get cheaply because the Labour Council and they're not charging a big rent, and the broken windows, and I'm wearing my overcoat, and we get up, comrades who will now sing the national anthem. Cluck, 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 the wooden chairs, not nice soft chairs like the chairs going down. And everybody raises their right arm. And my arm doesn't go up. It's got a life of its own. I'm not sending it a message, it's sending me a message. I just felt defeated. For 11 years, people might have thought it odd. Why isn't Comrade Albie raising his right arm? I go to Mozambique, it's newly independent. The day of the launch of the armed struggle at Mashaba Stadium, 60,000 people, there's Samora, there's Samora. And you see a little guy in his army fatigues coming there, and he goes to the microphone. Viva povo unido Rovuma Maputo. Long live the people united from the Rovuma to Maputo. And 60,000 arms shoot up into the air, including my arm. I had a right arm then. I got my courage back in Mozambique. I loved that country. The spirit was there. We spoke about the revolution. Everybody knew somebody who was a neighbor, or somebody who was married to somebody who'd been in the armed struggle. It was like the centerpiece of prestige and pride. 11 years later, I'm carried out, having been bombed. I see a soldier standing with a gun at the site where I'd come. I'd been so excited when I saw Frelimo's soldier with a gun on our side, a gun defending our freedom. And now I'm saying, no more guns, no more guns, no more guns. It couldn't be sustained. It couldn't be sustained. It was crushed. Bitter civil war in Mozambique, bitter civil war. Literally millions of refugees over the borders, millions of internal refugees. So many people without limbs, mainly legs, lost to landmines. It couldn't be sustained. They seemed to solve everything in a united people's power transformation. It couldn't be sustained. I couldn't imagine in South Africa, would we be able to get the transformations? How would we bring the armies together? How would we transform the public service? Let alone things like education institutions and all the rest. I'd envisage a much rougher process than we've had. In fact, it's been more tranquil, more even, more moving forward with steps back, but moving forward all the time than I'd envisaged. So the conflicts and the tensions that are there now, to my mind, are not of an order that I feel are challenging the whole society. I went to Tahrir Square after the fall of Mubarak. The people were dancing. I bought T-shirts. I went there 2 months later. People were still dancing. Now, 2 years later, Mubarak is being released. The Prime Minister elected is in prison, 1,000 people shot dead, the army in control. We don't have that in South Africa. Our president steps down, the first president to step down, Mandela voluntarily, after one term. Thabo Mbeki is voted out of office by his party, not because army generals are coming in there. He steps down. We have free and fair elections. We have an open society. People speak their mind. We have a strong, independent judiciary. I'm so proud of the judges, and I'm so proud to have been part of that process of creating a judiciary in South Africa. We have strong civil society. People can ask questions here quite freely, and challenging questions. And you can make jokes about the names of one of our participants in this process who happens to be the president. I can tell you lots of countries where you couldn't make that joke, but you can do it here in South Africa. So I feel we've got the mechanisms, we've got the freedom, we've got the openness, and we've got people. We're not going to give up our freedom in South Africa. We fought hard for it. And it's inside parties and outside parties. The same debates are happening inside the ANC, inside the government, outside the ANC, in other parties, in all the parties and so on. I found our democracy is vibrant and it's lively, even if at times it's extremely unpleasant and it takes offensive forms. So I think we've got to move away from the idea of Nelson Mandela as Mr. Nice Guy, and he's setting the template for everybody to be Mr. Nice Guy. It was rough It took us 6 years to get our constitution. We had breakdowns, we had rolling mass action, we had people being thrown off the trains. You see the film Bloody Miracle, you'll see it wasn't easy then. It wasn't a walk in the park. It was much rougher then than it is now. And I believe that we are strong enough as a society, as a nation, and our institutions are strong enough, and our mechanisms are strong enough, and our mentality is strong enough to contain the tensions that are existing now. Have I answered?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask Dr. Zuma to respond to one or two questions, specifically the old and new sides of them.
Well, okay. Look, I think let's make two analogies which may or may not be helpful. The first one is let's make an analogy with love. So I think the protests that are going on at UCT kind of, for me, resemble that process and that experience of love, where the first phase is about a sense of infatuation. And then when that fades, that's when the real test comes of whether it's love or it's just about the infatuation moment. So I think thinking about that in terms of where we are as a country with 20 years having come to an end last year, is that perhaps romantic infatuation idea about kumbaya and all of that is in essence coming to an end. And this current ongoing student protest, in a sense, marks for me and many other things that are going on nationally, that new moment where love is now being tested, where love is no longer this rush of emotions, but it gets, in a sense, concretized in the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis, because you can make decisions that communicate love or the lack thereof. So that's one thing to say, that in a sense what we have is an opportune moment to think about really and to rethink our commitments to what we've been calling the Rainbow Nation. All right, so I think it presents us with that gift, if you like. Now the question is then, in thinking about this gift, and let's say we are committed to creating a humane world in South Africa, and then the question is, how do we do it? How do we do it with these tensions between the old and the new? And I'll make an analogy this time with the body. Now, when the body evolves or grows, you know, from being a toddler and all of that, and you don't lose your old body. It's the old body, or it's the young body that grows into an older body. For example, when your fingers grow, the old ones don't fall off and new ones grow, but it's the old ones that grow. So then the question for me becomes, using that analogy, how do we work with the old? It's not about how do we destroy the old, but how do we work with it in constructive, ethical ways. And here I'm thinking of ethics not as a moral transcendental code of, you know, this is right, this is wrong, but let's think about ethics as a set of practices. Let's think about ethics as something that, how do I put it? All right, as something that is related to what you are capable of doing in the context in which you're in and given the powers that you have. How can I reach the limits of what is possible for me to do in this context in a constructive and ethical way? So then I think that thinking through those questions and those things and those issues challenge us. They don't give us immediate answers, but they require us to do what Fanon says. Let us invent. Let us introduce innovation into the world. Let us discover. Part of that discovery is discovering ourselves and that genre of the human I keep on speaking about in trying to resolve. That is where the new human is going to come out, in how we resolve these issues. So the new and the old need to live side by side in some way or the other. How that works out, I'm not entirely sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's 13:57. We're supposed to stop, but if you'll indulge us for about 10 minutes, Judge Sachs had warned me that if he gets a question, he will go on. He will go on and give another talk. But it's as you will agree, it is fantastic. So, with your indulgence, can we have a few more minutes extra, the second round, and I will ask a plea with Judge Sachs to keep the answers short, although we would like to hear more of. So, I will take 5. I see 6 hands, but can you keep it short, please? So I'll start from the front. Okay, Pumla.
When you were sharing with us thank you. When you were sharing with us your visit to the Women's Museum Memorial in 1990, there's something that you said that really struck me as being a profound statement. You said as you were leaving and as you were reflecting on what you witnessed at the museum, at the memorial, Women's Memorial, you said it was so much like us. And so the question for me is, how might we use the memorials of our different traumas in South Africa as a way of getting exactly to that point where you say it was so much like us?
Good afternoon. My name is Lishumelo Doyan. My question is directed to Dr. Zuma. You spoke about the importance of art in terms of in our own history. And what I find interesting is that, for example, I'm a photographer. I find visual arts to be one of the most powerful tools as far as social justice is concerned. But my main concern is that photography specifically remains a very elitist form of arts. You go to galleries are filled up with, your liberated, blacks or your elitist whites. And these galleries are within the city, they're not in the townships, where people are supposed to be taught about visual literacy and what is the importance of photography and what photography specifically has done in terms of liberating us as a nation. So my question is, how do we then change that? How do we change the perception of arts being made a very elitist form of field or whatever you want to call it? Thanks.
Okay, good morning to everyone. I'm Laura Jane Watkins. I'm a 4th year LLB student at the University of the Free State. My question is just to the floor as well as to the speakers. I'd like to start with saying I think we are at a juxtaposition because here we are at an academic institution faced with a very real social problem. And I think it's interesting that the speaker before me asked a question on perception, because I've always thought perhaps the debate around these statues and the remembrances of the past and past oppression, I always thought it was perhaps the effect was really up to the perspective. And I thought as a white student that was privileged that perhaps certain statues don't offend me as much as my fellow black students. And it's interesting because I think it's very important to place emphasis on knowing the history of these statues. Because I walk past the C.R. Swart building every day, and that statue is really a memorial of a man who promulgated the Immorality Act and the Bantu Education Act. And only once I knew this, it had struck me that I hadn't really asked myself how this actually affected me as a white privileged student and what my role is regarding the changing, perhaps, the narrative on this issue. Perhaps that it really comes down to a youth voice, that we should be asking the question, why is it that this situation or that this question was really a result of the youth mobilizing? And why is it that it is actually the youth that are searching for these answers? There's a quote by Mandela that says, our choices should reflect our hopes and not our fears. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think, where would the next step be in terms of platform given to students? Because I think often students' choices are very much reflected of their fears. Their fear of not being accepted into an academic space, their fear of not being or not, yes, so the fear in general of not being accepted onto certain platforms, and their fear of not being given a voice.
Thanks. I'll try not to start by a preamble. My name is Ntoxin Razuz, and I'll keep it very short. It's going to be short. Just wanted to know, what role does the history that our students learn in high school, primary school, university contribute to the narrative of these statues and the current contradictions that are happening? As she was saying, that there's some students who are not aware, and as Albie was saying, that there were particular materials that they used for something else, but those materials were used in the building of the museum, and it creates a particular connection, and so on and so forth. But how does that, for us who are not necessarily aware, who are not involved, and how does the history play that role, and the education play that role to create that connectedness that you spoke about? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Sikelela Ndlazi, third-year law student, and Judge Sachs, you have no idea how many cases you've judged on here. But I see you looking. How many cases of you I've read? But my one favorite case has always been the Fore case, and I just want to focus on that case because in the Fore case, I understand that it opened so many doors that were once shut for different kinds of people, the minority, and I've listened to Professor Leon Wessel speak, and I've had the privilege of having coffee with him, and I asked him the question. The Fore case was in 2006/2007. That is the last landmark thing we've ever heard when it comes to gay and lesbian circumstances and cases. But now my question is, when is the next big step? Because we've also had the privilege of having Sir Thomas Hobbes as a guest lecture in one of my classes, and then he says that his view is that the Constitution and so many people like Pierre Foss use the Constitution as such a sharp sword to force the way through for so many people that were previously discriminated against. And then you have Leon Wessels who says that is the right thing to be done. Use the Constitution as a sharp sword to open so many doors and ways for so many people who previously did not have those doors and avenues at their disposal. Now my question to you is, Judge, what is your opinion? Do we say, by saying that we should not force so many people's ways using the Constitution, is that not denying the urgency of the reconciliation element between many different kinds of people on this country?
Afternoon, I'm Hopelang Khaile. And my question goes to Judge Albie. In your book, The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law, you speak about equality of the graveyard and the vineyard, something that blew my mind. So it made me think, do you think that we can use the same principle or model as students to eradicate or eliminate institutional racism?
Thank you very much for those questions.
Okay, let me start with that last one for people here who might not understand the context of equality of the graveyard, equality of the vineyard. The issue in the Fore case was same-sex couples didn't have the same rights as heterosexual couples to be married in public and have their marriage publicly recognized as a marriage. How do you equalize? And you can equalize up or you can equalize down. You can say, okay, then no one must have the right to have public recognition, gay and lesbian, on the one hand, and straight people on the other hand. That's equality. And there were strong arguments for that. Leave marriage to the churches, the faith communities. And in public, you just recognize civil unions that have legal consequences. And logically, a lot of progressive people supported that idea. In practice, in context, it would have been a disaster. The straight community would have said, what, we can't marry anymore because of these people? And these people, inverted commas, would have said, just when we're reaching the mountaintop, they're going to abolish marriage so that we don't have that opportunity. So we decided, we suggested, the way Parliament should go is to equalize up and not equalize down. Formally, you achieve equality both ways. And you get it in all sorts of other areas of equal protection. Pension ages, 65, 60, men, women. Do you equalize up, down? Which is more beneficial to the different people? And there isn't one automatic answer. But our vision of the Constitution was it was an emancipatory vision. So equalizing up seemed to be the right way to go. How to use the Constitution now? I don't see it as a sharp tool. I see it as an enduring, powerful shield in many respects. And it can be a tool to open up things. It's been very important in terms of eviction law. It's a defensive tool. Saving, we had the Slums Act in KwaZulu-Natal. A vision. Oh boy, we're going to clear away all the slums in Pietermaritzburg, in Durban. We're going to build new high-rises. It's going to beautify our city. But we said, what's happening to the hundreds of thousands of people living there? Precarious. They're protected by the Constitution. And the Slums Act simply says the demolitions and so on have to be conducted in keeping with the Constitution and the law, as though everybody whose shack is about to be demolished can have the law in his pocket, can get a lawyer immediately and so on. We said that was unconstitutional. And it's been quite an important mediator in that sense in our country to prevent the wholesale shifting around of the poor, like you get in Kenya and other countries, simply to make way for what's called progress. And that's quite important. The Constitution doesn't build homes, it doesn't provide jobs, it doesn't provide access to medical treatment, but it does ensure that where these things exist, their homes are being built on an enormous scale. They're not fantastic homes, but they are homes. 3.5 million homes have been built. That means 12 million people have moved from shacks into homes. It's astonishing by international standards, and yet we said the Housing Act was unconstitutional to the extent it didn't have provision for Mrs. Grootboom and others who were in total desperation, sleeping out on a sports field that's just a piece of dusty land with 3 sticks on each side. And we said they have to have provision for emergency victims of fire, floods, and evictions. It has to be put in there. It's helping to moralize our society. It's quite important in that way. And that was the height of, if you like, neoliberalism in the world, where all problems will be solved by the market, the lifting tide will bring everybody up. And we said, Mrs. Grootboom matters. She's a person, she's a citizen, she's a South African, and you can't just say, get into the queue, and the fact that you're sleeping out in the cold like that is irrelevant. But don't load too much onto the Constitution. The Constitution provides the mechanism for Parliament to function, provides for the vote, provides for information, it provides for going to court if there's arbitrary conduct. People, South Africans, are using it very, very strongly, but it's not a substitution. It's not a substitute for action, for using the rights that you've got. I sometimes say maybe too much lamentation, not enough activation. So a little less lamenting on our part, a little more activity on our part to use the rights the Constitution gives us to deal with all the problems that we have, but don't expect the Constitution or the court to wave a magic wand and to give the things that you want. And what were the other? History. I'm following Oliver. He's 8 now, so he's only in grade, grade 2. He's just moved into primary school. And we haven't done with history yet, so as he goes up, I'll see what's being taught in the schools. But I'm just going to mention a lecture I heard by Professor Colin Bundy, one of our great historians, some years back. He said, how do you write South African history in the new democratic South Africa? And he said the one way to do it is to simply turn around the history of the past. So the conquerors bringing civilization, the people bringing civilization, civilizers become conquerors. The indigenous people represented as barbaric natives become the heroes, and the people marching in become the villains. And it's the same history, but you're just reversing the adjectives that you use. And he said, there's been an enormous amount of distortion in our history, and vilification has played a part. We've got to remove that clearly. But the new history can't simply be inverting, recharacterizing the same events. We've got to look at our history quite differently. Secondly, he said another approach has been, let each community tell its own history. So you'll get people from the African community telling the history, the whites telling the history, Afrikaners, particular dimension of it, Indian people, colored people. He said that's group areas act in history. Communities don't develop autonomously. White people are employing black people, they're pushing them off the land of black people, we're connected by the laws, by the economy, we interact with each other. History can't be separated out in that way. Then he said a third variant is to have a consensus. You get people from all the communities and backgrounds, and they agree on a kind of, I won't say lowest common denominator, a common denominator history. But he said history isn't like that. It's not the lowest common denominator. History has a vitality and an energy, and you can't get a group of historians to agree on a history. By its nature, history is turbulent and defies agreement. He said, so what he would argue for is you take fragments of history, facts, material relics, incontrovertible pieces of evidence, and you make each one a source of debate and contestation, and you get a critical history being represented that way. And my response was, Colin, I think I love that last thing, but you can't get there from the apartheid to there in one leap. You can't. We have to deal with the way in which our history has been told that glorified the whites and denigrated black people. It's implanted in us. It's emotional. These are psychological scars of superiority and scars of inferiority. They have to be dealt with. We need our heroes. We need people looking back in our past that we can look back to with pride. We can't make poor Nelson Mandela carry the whole burden of hundreds of years of our history just all on his shoulders. That was my first point. I said, secondly, we do need many voices coming in, and people have, through their grandparents and others, important sources to give, to contribute. That's very important. So don't ignore the importance of communities. Thirdly, we're going to need books now. We need something that gives basic dates, basic periods, a sense of history, of episodes, and so on. And there's no other way to do it. You've got to get teams of historians, and they're going to produce textbooks like that. You can't leap from the phase that you want straight into the critical looking at historiography for the future. And only when we've gone through 1, 2, and 3, maybe some of the more advanced teachers, maybe at university level, we can rely much more on that last thing of using the fragments and getting contestation and debate going. So until Oliver reaches the standards where the history is actually being taught, I don't have anything more to offer other than to say you can't bypass the phased reconstruction and retelling of our history, but make it democratic, make it across the board, make it open-ended, make people have a reverence for history, not because it is as it is and you've got to learn it off by heart and repeat it in some kind of hallowed way, but because history was history. That's created us. That's who we are. We have a reverence for our past, for knowing and understanding our past. We know we will never know it all. You can't know it all, but we can be in touch with it as much as possible. Was that it?
The Swart statue, and
Oh yes, C.R. Swart. Yes, you know, C.R. Swart, I'm old enough to feel a particular irritation, but coupled with a certain sense of amusement. He was the Minister of Justice at a time when they introduced whipping for stock theft and for other things of that kind. This whole idea that you can deal with crime through being brutal yourself. You know, we learned such bitter lessons then. Capital punishment didn't stop the freedom struggle. They hanged Vusile Mini, but we carried on fighting. And the whipping didn't stop the stock theft anyhow. And the opposition then, the United Party, said, okay, but we think a maximum of 15 strokes is too much. That was the opposition. Can we reduce it to 10? And C.R. Swart said, oh, well, what's 5 strokes between friends? He'd actually been an actor in Hollywood at one stage. He was a tall guy. He was a bit different from totally different from D.F. Malan and the others who were very dour and serious and so on. So he had a bit of personality in that sense, but we hated him. He represented that cavalier, disdainful, avowedly, openly white domination, racist outlook. So it's a shock for me. When I came back from 24 years of exile, I couldn't get excited by the then Minister of Justice because I hadn't been around when he was doing all the horrible things. But I could still get excited by that old generation who now exists only in museum pictures and so on. But then I also had a nice feeling, well, who's getting the last laugh? It's not C.R. Swart. There he is. You know, it's just his name is there. The things he stood for are being repudiated and denounced and overturned and transcended. So in that sense, our generation is having the last laugh. And they did things brutally, through power. One of our great gains is we don't do things brutally, through power. We don't say it's because we were elected, we're in charge, we have the right to do what we like. We're restrained by the Constitution, but it's not just by the Constitution. It's a style of working and doing things that makes us so South African and makes us, I think, human in a very, very deep